Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we heard your questions, we got your comments, and we definitely got your complaints. Today, we're doing a follow-up episode on Maura murder. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my co-pilot and co-host, Alice.
Hey, Brett. How are you?
Doing well, Alice. Doing well. Happy to be talking about Maura Murray one more time. We're going to do it again tomorrow, so first of two times. It's kind of funny. We've done 4 episodes, and now I guess we'll be up to 6. There's plenty to talk about.
There really is. And this is in response to all of your wonderful comments, emails, tweets, criticisms, tomatoes lobbed at us. So this is for you all.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We did the 4 episodes and we just recorded them, back to back to back to back months ago now, I guess, a couple months ago. It was kind of interesting getting sort of rolling feedback, hearing somebody say something and being like, well, we're going to make that mistake again tomorrow. So, but yeah, we really appreciate people reaching out with their comments, questions, corrections, that sort of thing. We like to get things right. So to the extent we can do that, we're going to do it. So let's just dive in. I'm just going to run through real fast a couple things people pointed out, and then we're going to talk about some stuff in more detail. So real quick, just the sort of little errors that you have. It was nice after we did this episode, people pointed us to all sorts of resources we could use, which would have been very valuable researching for the first few episodes. But the good news is we can now correct various things. First thing isn't really an error, but I guess it was confusing. Maura went to UMass Amherst. We tended to just call it Amherst, which the problem with that is Massachusetts is covered up with good schools, and there is a school called Amherst in Amherst. So some people were confused about that, but she did go to UMass. Fort Knox, we are well aware that she did not steal the makeup from the vault at Fort Knox. That was not the point we were trying to make. The point was more of a psychological one, that you would go to the place most renowned for security and then steal from the commissary. But we know.
But a follow-up on that, on that Fort Knox point is, if you've gone to a school with an honor system, which West Point does have an honor system, one offense, no matter how small it is enough to basically get you kicked out of school. So, Fort Knox is where it happened, but also the fact that there is an offense in which she could be kicked out of school for. Now, something this small, we've heard from those who attended West Point, probably would not result in her termination, or expulsion from school. But I went to a school, an undergrad with an honor system, and it was the same thing. Anything as small as that could result in your expulsion. So it's still a serious thing, to commit.
Right. And I think it says a lot about her thinking at the time. I'm not exactly sure what it says about her thinking, but I do think, it's more significant than just somebody stealing $5 worth of makeup. Now, this one was kind of funny. We had our first episode and we couldn't remember whether the scrubs were returned or not. And so then the second episode, between the first episode and the second episode, looked into it, found out it was scrubs, corrected that. And then literally like a week later, Erin Larkin does her podcast and points out that it wasn't scrubs. It was actually some clothes she was returning. So there's that. Timing. I actually think, I don't know about this one, frankly. We said she left, in the 3:00 hour from Amherst. Some people say that she left around 4:30. Now, I know she went to the ATM at 3:40. I don't know if she went back to campus after that. Some people say she did. Frankly, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other, but just know that she probably left Amherst proper at around 4:30 whenever she might have left campus. She did not total her dad's car. She did $8,000, $10,000 worth of damage to it, but I guess it wasn't totaled. Apparently, she never called North Conway, so I don't know where that came from. The email to Bill was not sitting on boxes in her room. It was stuck in a sports program by her desk. She didn't buy the wine that night. She already had it. The roads weren't particularly icy, though I'll just go ahead and tell you, in New England in the winter, it doesn't matter, frankly. If you're up in New Hampshire on those, curving roads, they're all bad roads. The name of the barn is not the Big Red Barn. The Big Red Barn. It's the Weathered Barn. And she didn't take her Baileys when she took her alcohol from her car. She took her vodka and her Kahlua.
So quick note on that, Brett, you kind of rattled off in quick succession a lot of inaccuracies. And again, thank you guys for pointing those out. But I also have to note that, sometimes I think the downfall in all the attention on this case is nitpicking things that may not ultimately matter. And, maybe one of these factual inaccuracies is the smoking gun that can solve the case. Likely it's not. And I think, we discussed this in our episodes that when you go to trial, kind of the hardest thing as an attorney is just take a step back and be able to see the case for what it is and to be able to parse out the important facts versus the unimportant facts. And so we're not saying these are unimportant, but rather all of these inaccuracies that were pointed out, I don't think changes our ultimate analysis or conclusions that we reached in the first 4 episodes. What do you think, Brett?
Yeah, we're happy, you guys, if you ever hear errors in our cases, we're happy to correct them. We don't want to put, errors out in the universe. But I think one thing that's a little troubling is how much people argue about this stuff online. I mean, people just get into these like knockdown, drag out fights about how much alcohol did she take from her car and which bottles of alcohol did she take. And at the end of the day, I mean, it doesn't matter. Frankly, it just doesn't matter. And I think there's a tendency in a case like this for some folks to kind of feel like they own the case and this is their case, and they're very sort of negative towards outsiders and new people coming in. And I don't think that's helpful at all, particularly in a case like this where we really want new people, new ideas, new ways of looking at things. But we did want to go through those, so we corrected those. If there's anything else we missed, let us know. Big picture, though, the response from people was just incredible. I can't tell you how many people reached out to us, including pretty much everyone involved in this case. Aaron Larkin, James Renner, the guys from Missing Maura Murray, Bill Roush, Julie Murray. All these folks reached out to us, gave us a lot of sort of information, helped us with some questions we had. I really, kind of felt like I just wish everybody could get along in this case, because it seems like so many people are so passionate about it, and they want to see, they want to see a resolution to this case, and they want to find Maura, and they're sincere. And man, it sure would be nice if we lived in a world where, and I know this is never going to happen, and they'll probably both be mad at me for even suggesting it, but where like a James Renner and an Aaron Larkin could get along and sort of work in common. Because, Aaron knows this case. It's amazing how well she knows it. James has done so much work on it, and knows it really well too, and has this massive platform. And it's just unfortunate how often the drama just seeps in. And we saw that even as we were releasing episodes, we were getting drawn in on Twitter to these fights between various people. And I think everybody agrees it's not productive. It's just, I don't know what to do about it.
Amen. No.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know what else to say.
I think maybe a way to put it is to say that there is so much wonderful passion surrounding this case, and not every missing person case, not every victim of a crime gets that amount of passion, so wide ranging. Now, if only we could harness that passion to work all together, that it could be exponential in terms of the benefit.
So maybe we can work towards that. I don't know. I feel like we've probably got a long way to go. So we ran through some of the mistakes we made. They're kind of, tiny little things, but are important to people to get right. Bigger mistakes we made. We talked about Guy Parody, and we talked about the interview he did on Aaron Larkin's podcast. And I think at some point we called him the Murrays private investigator. That's wrong. He does not work for the Murrays. He has never worked for the Murrays. He actually works for the League, or works with the League of Investigators in New Hampshire, which is a great name. They're like the superheroes of private investigation or something. John Healy is the head of that organization. And the interesting thing about it, they did look into Maura's case, and you might think that means they were working for the family, but it seems like they weren't, because all the information that they got, they shared with the New Hampshire Police Department. They did not share it with Fred. And I know there was actually a lot of sort of bad blood and a falling out there, because Fred, understandably, did not appreciate the fact that they are investigating his daughter's disappearance, but not sharing any information with him. So we definitely wanted to clear that up. Guy is controversial. We criticized him some in our podcast. He's been criticized for other reasons, but he's his own guy. He's not, the Murrays private investigator or anything like that.
Yeah, it is very confusing to me why, I don't know if they're a nonprofit, but they're certainly not law enforcement, even if they are former law enforcement officials, why they would not share that information with the family. But, I don't know how they work.
Yeah, tomorrow we're going to do another episode, but it's going to be sort of a purely legal episode. So we're going to talk about FOIA. We're going to talk about how that works, and that's the Freedom of Information Act. For those of you who don't know, there's a federal FOIA. There's also state FOIAs. New Hampshire has one. It's modeled off the federal system. We'll talk about that more tomorrow and sort of get into information sharing. The interesting thing, like Alice said, we totally get it why police can be reluctant to do so. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, but the League of Investigators are not the police. So they could have shared this information with the family, and they didn't for whatever reason. And so I can understand why there's some real, bad blood's probably too strong, but there's some issues there between the family and the League. So just to dive into some of the things we want to talk about more in depth, because we do want to follow up on some stuff. We want to follow up on some of your comments. And the one we're going to start with A gentleman named Michael D. commented and said, I think someone grabbed her, but the way you guys laugh things off is absurd. Until we know the truth, anything is possible. Appreciate Michael's point of view, but I could not disagree with him more. At some level, sure. Until you know what happened, anything could have happened. But if you're going to do an investigation and you're going to try and reach some sort of truth, the way you're going to do that is you're going to take the facts, you're going to take the evidence, and you're going to apply them to the various theories that are out there. You could say, for instance, that you think Bill Rausch did it. But at least on the night that Maura disappeared, Bill Rausch was in Oklahoma. So one thing we can say for sure, Bill Rausch was not in New Hampshire on the wild Ammonoosuc Road. Got it. I know how to pronounce it now.
Good job, Brett. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. I'm proud of myself too. Killing Maura Murray. He wasn't doing that. And we know that because of the evidence that we've looked at. So that means that's not possible. And you can do that with lots of different theories. Now, some of them you're going to be able to rule out altogether. We can rule that one out altogether. There are others that you can't rule them out, but you can sort of push them to the back burner. So the tandem driver theory that James Renner had at one point, I think, given the evidence, it's very unlikely. That she went up there to commit suicide, I think, given the evidence, is unlikely. And I think if your goal is not so much just to talk about the case, but maybe sort of direct people and resources and thinking towards what might have happened, that's an important thing to do. And it can be controversial. We totally get that. But on our podcast, we're going to do it. There are some podcasts that don't like to put their theories out there. They don't like to say what they think. That's not going to be us. We're going to do that. We're going to open ourselves up to that criticism, and that's fine.
Yeah, and one other thing to add about that, remember our point of view. If you're the law enforcement investigating the case, I think you start out with, open doors and then you slowly close them. But as prosecutors, we're further down the road in an investigation. And if we are moving towards an indictment or moving towards trial, you really do have to close off a lot of those doors in order to tell a coherent story. And so obviously in this case, there's so many open questions, but that's the framework we're trying to work under so that we can try and reach some sort of plausible understanding of what happened in the case.
Very briefly, sort of an update on the A-frame house. We talked about that a little bit in episode 4, I think. So Maggie Freeling reached out, chatted with her a little bit. She and Lance and Tim had raised money to do the ground penetrating radar. They did it there. They didn't find anything. The police, the authorities in New Hampshire have looked in the A-frame house. They didn't find anything. So I think we're sort of back to where we ended up. You've got those blood samples and whatnot. Maybe one day they'll be able to do some sophisticated DNA tests on them. But I think at this point, we can pretty much rule out the A-frame house until something happens to rule it in. Associated with that, we had talked about evidence that had been submitted to the police and whether or not it was tested. Alice expressed some doubt that anything submitted to the police would not be tested. Alice, as always, was correct. Everything that's been submitted to the police has been tested, and you can feel confident in that. Okay, so one theory we did not talk about that's out there is that the reason Maura was going to New Hampshire was to pay a reinstatement fee for her license. Erin Larkin talks about this on her podcast, and we also, as I said, we talked to Julie. And this is something we talked to Julie about. And the theory is essentially, I guess, the year before Maura went missing, I believe in September, she was in New Hampshire. Could have been in July, actually. I think it was in July.
It was July.
It was July, yeah. Because, yeah, it was July. So she was up in New Hampshire. She was driving her dad's car. And Maura does not know how to drive. So she was driving at least 99 miles an hour, and she got stopped by the police and got a ticket. And that's a substantial ticket. I can tell you I have as I say in a future episode, I have prosecuted tickets before, a ticket docket, and where I was, for every mile you were going over 90, that was a half day in jail. I wonder in New Hampshire if there's not a similar thing if you're going over 100. I think they probably cut her a break on the 99. But in any event, it's like a $350 ticket, and it's the kind of ticket that results in your license being suspended until you pay the fine, and then you pay a reinstatement fee. Now, Maura had a Massachusetts driver's license, so it takes some leaps of logic here, but let me just go ahead and lay out how this theory goes. She has a Mass license. She gets her driving privileges suspended in New Hampshire. There's reciprocity between New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Her license would have been suspended in Massachusetts as well. The night that she wrecks her dad's car, the police officer would have ran her license, seen that it was suspended, alerted her to that fact. Then she would have thought, well, I need to get that fixed because we're going to buy this new car and we're going to register it in my name, and I can't register it unless this suspension problem's taken care of. And the only way to do that is to go to New Hampshire and pay the $100, get my license reinstated, and we're back in business, right?
So, Brett, I had to bite my tongue a few times because I know you said those were leaps of logic, but as you laid it out like that, I mean, there were just too many leaps of logic in order for that to make sense to me. And,
yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's possible that Massachusetts was able to see New Hampshire's driver's license records. Typically, that's not the case. Typically, your own little jurisdiction, your own state can only see your own licenses. Now, maybe because they're very close, these states are very small, it's very easy to cross the border. Maybe the Massachusetts police could access records for New Hampshire. But here's kind of the big thing. If, in fact, Maura didn't know that her license was suspended in New Hampshire and she was alerted of this by the police is alerting her after she's gotten into a pretty serious accident, whether her dad's car was totaled or there was $8,000 to $10,000 of damage. That's a lot of damage, right? It's the middle of the night. It's probable she was drinking. He doesn't cite her for anything. Not a DUI, not a DWI, not a warning, nothing. Now, I could see maybe a cop giving Maura a break on the DWI or the DUI. But if you compound that with driving without a license, with a suspended license, with those two serious things next to each other, I would be very surprised that a police officer responding to this serious accident would not even write her a warning if they knew about this fact. So that, we don't know what happened that night, if she actually found out about this or not, but I would be very surprised if that police officer did not do something official that would be documented with those two serious offenses and, arriving at the scene of the accident.
I think that's right. And there's a couple other significant problems. I mean, even if you think this police officer just really liked Maura and is just cutting her the biggest break ever, Maura, if she needed to do this, she could have driven to Concord, New Hampshire, and taken care of that the next day on Monday, that Monday. It's a 2-hour drive to Concord. Zip up there, pay the thing, zip back. That seems like a much more reasonable thing to do than to drive your car. Apparently, the best bet we have is she's going to Burlington, Vermont. We talked about how those directions were found in her car. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. But if she was going to Burlington, that's not towards Concord. So you have to think she was going up there maybe for a little mini vacation, was going to swing back by Concord afterwards. Another reason that doesn't make sense, she did have clinicals that week. My understanding is her clinicals are on Tuesday and Wednesday, which is even more reason. If you had to take care of this, just take care of it on Monday. And, something that I think undercuts this pretty significantly. Like I said, we talked to Julie about this. One of the questions we had was, who was going to have this car? Whose name was this car going to be in? And Julie was able to not 100% confirm, but enough really for me that they would have done whatever made the most sense monetarily. And the thing that makes the most sense monetarily is to put it in her father's name. And if you're putting it in her father's name, then this urgency to go deal with this license issue in New Hampshire just isn't there. If she needed to do that, and she probably did eventually, assuming that it was even suspended, I don't even know that we know that for sure. She could have done it after she had a nice new car that didn't have all the issues her car has. So it's a nice theory. It explains a lot, but there's some huge holes in it. And I don't think that's why she was driving to New Hampshire that night.
And it also seems that since she had been car shopping with her dad, if the reason was they needed her to have a valid license, or he wanted her to have a valid license for the new car, you would think that would be part of their discussion, that she would have told her dad, well, you know what, I'll go take care of this tomorrow. But as far as we know, he didn't know that she was going to be taking this trip.
Okay, so Patrice Vassy, if you're listening, you know at the end of our show, we talked about the possibility that she was involved in the Patrice Vassy accident. One thing we pointed to were the very small paint chip that was found on Patrice Vassy and how it might match the emblem on a Saturn. And, I love you guys. Somebody has ordered an emblem and it's on its way, and they're going to test it and see if they can recreate that chip. That's fantastic.
That's awesome dedication.
I know. I love that.
I didn't even think to do that.
And honestly, that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about that, because I knew if we put that out there into the world, people would be able to test it and challenge it and figure out whether or not it has any connection. So one criticism of the theory that somebody made was that the emblem, I guess, is plastic. So there would not have been a white base paint. So basically you had the silver and you had the red, but the white base might be an issue. Now, here's the thing, though. Plastic starts off as milky white, so I don't think this is a paint chip in like the kind of paint chip you would take to Home Depot to match, with your wall color so you could repaint your room. I think this is more sort of like a chunk of whatever it is. Let's say it's the emblem, just for the sake of argument. If it was a chunk of the emblem that had some of the red and some of the silver, the white might just be the sort of underlying plastic itself, or even the back of the plastic.
And you can imagine if you think of just whatever piece of plastic you have around the house, some plastic cup. If you bend it the way it's not supposed to so that you're like making a crease in it, you know how the color kind of gives way, you can kind of see white in it? That's what I'm imagining, is like there's white in it. So I'm thinking about, say, a red plastic cup. If I bend it and try to break it, I'm going to see kind of the stretched out of the red because the plastic is starting to give way, and then you see kind of a white interior. That's what I'm imagining.
Exactly. Now, Lance and Tim over at Missing Maura Murray, they sent us some footage and some pictures they had taken of the car. You can't really tell that there's any damage to this emblem. I will say this, it's very small, so I think you'd have to get up there with a magnifying glass to be able to tell. Someone also suggested that the paint could be from a Massachusetts license plate, which I think is also possible. And honestly, I still think a big possibility here is that it's not even related to the wreck, that it was something that when Patrice hit the ground, picked up. I think it's significant that it's redacted in the report, because I think that means the police believe it's related to the wreck. You'll note they do not redact the yellow paint that's consistent with the road paint, right? Because they obviously don't think that's related. And as we'll talk about tomorrow, when you're doing these responses to FOIA, one thing you're keeping back is any evidence that you think would be related to the crime itself. So, frankly, James Renner should never have seen that, but I'm glad he did. The advantage to it being from the emblem is you could definitively tie it, possibly, to Maura's car. If it's from a license plate, there's a lot of Massachusetts license plates. But look, whatever it is, I don't think it rules her out. So to the extent that people were ruling her out based on the license plate, based on the paint chip, I think that's a mistake. Some other reasons people rule her out. Let's address those, because we heard about this a lot. Maura's car the place where she would park was not very close to where she worked. So if you're thinking she has a job where a lot of people are coming in and out, if she's gone, she can't be gone for long. Her supervisors are coming around at sort of regular intervals. How is she going to get all the way to where her car was in her parking spot, right? Well, here's the thing. When I was in college and working, not the same security job, but a similar job where I was working at a building that was not particularly close to where I lived, if it was a cold night, I would drive. And I would park close to where I worked in places I was not supposed to park. But I knew, based on experience and being around there, where you could get away with parking and where you couldn't. And there were places where, yeah, if the police came by, they could give you a ticket or they could tow you or whatever, but they never did that. And I knew that. And I took advantage of that. Talked to Erin Larkin about this. She worked a very similar job. She obviously can't confirm whether or not Maura was doing that, but I think she generally said, yeah, you probably could do that. You probably could find places where parking enforcement at night was not going to be as rigorous as it would be during the day. Another interesting thing. So let's say she did that. Let's say she drove and maybe even, parked on the street or something, or parked somewhere where she wasn't supposed to be. My understanding is it snowed the next day, and even snowed quite a bit. If you've ever lived in New England, Alice can attest to this.
Goodness.
Yeah.
The parking situation for when it snows is the worst.
It's awful. And the thing you have to do is by midnight, if there's going to be a snow emergency or whatever, by midnight, you have to move your car. You can't just leave it where it's parked. And if you do that, in Cambridge, they would tow your car. In a lot of other places, you get like a massive ticket. Well, what if, we're just throwing things out there, what if that night she had driven to where she worked and the snow's coming and she knows that, so she knows she has to move her car by midnight. She decides, I got to move my car. I'm going to go pick up something, right? We go back to the why was she driving in that direction? She's in a hurry because she has to go get what she wants to get. She has to return her car to where it needs to be, and then she has to get back to work. The rest, is history. So I think that's how I would address this notion that she parked, she wasn't parked close enough to make this viable. Another thing, let's just think about the Patrice Vassy accident. So what do we know about it, right? If we don't know anything else, what do we know about it? Number one, we know it's never been solved. Right? So whoever did it got away with it, whether it was her or not. Number two, we know there was a limited population of people who could have done this. The people in Amherst, right? A lot of them were asleep, so we can cut those people out, right? So it had to be somebody who was awake, who was living in Amherst. There's not much paint on Patrice Vassy at all. We talked about the paint chip, which means it had to be somebody who was awake in Amherst, who's driving a car that isn't going to have a lot of paint transfer. Somebody pointed out to us, and this was a really good point, that Maura's car is just that kind of car, that you wouldn't have that much paint transfer from a car built in the way that her car is built. So, look, as I said earlier, unless you can take that paint chip and take it to Maura's car that's been sitting out in a field for 17 years or 16 years, however long it's been now, and compare it and it matches, you're never going to be able to show definitively that this is what happened. But I think it's a possibility. I think it's a possibility you can't ignore. And I think it has the advantage that if it happened, it explains a lot of what happened after that.
And one other thing, I think someone had pointed out that the timing would be too tight because of the phone calls she had, in particular a phone call with Bill. She would have had to, talk to him and then basically run to her car, hit Patrice Vassy, return her car, come back to the security desk. But what if she were on the phone with Bill in the car and distracted? You don't necessarily have to be doing all of those things exclusive from each other. You could be in a car driving on the phone. I think many of us have probably been in that situation. And it's so distracting that many states now have laws where you can't talk on the phone while you're driving. Now it has to be handless talking. So All I'm saying, I don't know that for a fact. All I'm saying is just because we have a phone record close in time to when the accident would have happened doesn't necessarily mean it rules out the fact that it was her.
Another thing about timing, somebody said that it couldn't have been her because her supervisor found her around 10:30. That is a misconception created by the supervisor herself. Her supervisor said in an interview with Tim and Lance that she found her around 10:30, which, I even remember hearing that, and then it all fits, right? Like she talks to her sister right before 10:30. The supervisor comes by. She's in this catatonic state. She takes her home. The supervisor was confused about timing because she was thinking there were different schedules, and she was thinking of Maura being on a weekday schedule, but the Thursday schedule was actually on the weekend schedule. So Maura was there later than she would have been otherwise. She has since corrected that. It was closer to the time that we discussed in the show. So as far as timing goes that way, it's perfectly possible, perfectly plausible. And let's talk a little bit about Maura's state of mind.
Wait, before we move on there, since we're talking about potentially the call to her sister Kate that could have upset her, I realize that some people may have been confused because I got a message from someone listening to the podcast. She actually has two sisters. So she has a sister named Kathleen. That's the one she supposedly spoke to the night of the catatonic state. As you guys have heard, we've referred to another sister, Julie. Julie is the one who went to West Point. So some people have wondered how the sister who went to West Point may have struggled with alcoholism. I just wanted to clear that up for anyone who may not have known she had two sisters.
Okay, so one of the reasons we talked about this, and I think one of the reasons people find it to be an attractive theory, I mean, there's the sort of, it's kind of conspiracy-ish and people like that, but it's difficult to imagine why Maura was in the state she was in that night. And like I said, we talked to Bill, we talked to Julie, and they both thought absolutely this phone call from Kathleen would upset her quite a bit. It was something that would definitely bother her, but they did not think that it would put her in the state that was described by her supervisor. And her supervisor basically says that when she comes in and she's talking to Maura, Maura is unresponsive. And the whole, my sister thing, it's actually, she asks her a question and minutes seemingly pass with her not saying anything. And then finally she says, my sister. We did ask Bill about that phone call. He does not remember it. So if there was anything significant in it, it wasn't that significant because he does not recall it. So yeah, I mean, and it didn't stop then either. We talked about that night when she called her friend about returning the clothes. She was sobbing even then, and her friend asked her if everything was okay, and she said no. And she asked her what was wrong, and she said, my sister, again. So you have that. It is just difficult. It's difficult to figure out what was going on with Maura. We talk about Occam's razor, and I guess the simplest explanation here is, look, she got a bad phone call from her sister, and then she's really upset. They're probably connected. Totally get that. But it just doesn't seem like anyone who knew her believes that she would have reacted that way in that circumstance.
And not only did they say that they don't think this particular call would have upset her that much, both Bill and Julie kind of confirmed what I thought would be the case, is that neither of them, and they seem to be the closest to her, have ever seen her in that sort of a state before. So, I'm sure they've seen her in many different emotions, but, Brett, have you ever seen someone in kind of a catatonic state? I have not, not in a movie.
No, I haven't. I've never seen anyone in that state. I mean, obviously, we call it a catatonic state. We get it. She probably doesn't fit the clinical definition of a catatonic state, but even the sort of colloquial description of somebody who is just so completely out of it and seemingly disturbed. I mean, look, something was going on with Maura, and I don't know what it was, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't typical. It wasn't, just the standard stresses of life. I just don't believe that.
And let's talk about the stresses of life, because Maura seems to be someone who can handle stresses pretty well. She took difficult academic courses. I think she took an overload. In fact, she's running track at a high level. I know she's injured at this time, but, she's an athlete. She's a, academically achieving student. She's working jobs to pay for her, own way. And so she's not someone who's kind of this, I'm not getting the image of someone who can't handle her stresses. Sounds like she has many stresses that she balances quite well most of the time in her life.
Right. And look, everything we've heard is she was much happier at UMass. Her mom was dealing with cancer. Sure, that was a huge stress on her, and I'm sure it bothered her a lot. As Julie pointed out when we talked to her, that's even more of a reason not to believe that Maura just disappeared and is living on an island somewhere, because she just wouldn't do that. She wouldn't do that with her mom going through what she was going through. But yeah, and the thing about the Kathleen incident, I'm sure it was upsetting and I'm sure it was disappointing, but if you've dealt with a situation where someone in your family is struggling with addiction and struggling with substance abuse, and I don't want to be callous, but you prepare yourself for that, right? Like, you know that those things are going to happen. You know that it's going to be a struggle and it's going to be a fight. So I'm not saying she wouldn't be upset, but that level of being upset is something that is difficult to comprehend. And we've tried to think of something, what could it be other than, the Patrice Vassy thing? Because I still am hesitant about Patrice just because it does seem like such a conspiracy theory, and I don't like conspiracy theories. We talked about the pregnancy thing. Alice and I did. We've revisited that. I know we laughed it, off the podcast when we were talking about it the first time. But maybe you could sort of imagine that she's got a pregnancy test and she takes it there at work and she's pregnant, and maybe she calls Bill or whatever and they have a conversation about it, and she's 21 years old. What is she going to do? Is she going to have this baby? Is she going to, have an abortion or whatever, right? I mean, you could imagine something like that. The problem is it just doesn't really fit. We talked about she's taking her birth control. My understanding is that was something that she was serious about, and it wasn't the kind of thing that she took it sometimes, didn't take it other times. The drinking, it doesn't really make sense. Obviously, you do have the pregnancy terms and the how much alcohol does it take to harm an unborn child that James Renner talks about, but then you have the clinical rotation through the maternity ward, and you have the homework assignments about maternity. And so it just seems like it's more likely that she wasn't pregnant.
But I think, you're right that because of her state and the people who knew her well, we're trying to think of what big event in her life could put her into this state. And that's why we're thinking the Patrice Vassy accident, or not accident, really the hit and run, or something like finding out you're pregnant unexpectedly. I think I was the one who was vigorously arguing against that in previous podcasts, and I still stand by that it's probably unlikely that she was pregnant. But if that were the reason, it would give us some sort of narrative as to why she was in that state and why she had to get out of town. She knew the White Mountains and she liked it up there. It's a lot to deal with whatever you decide to do if you find out you're unexpectedly pregnant. Maybe she told some friends, and they may think that this has nothing to do with her disappearance and they don't want to spread, information about her that she didn't want spread. Maybe she just wanted to get away, clear her head, think about it, or she had decided what to do and she was going to leave town to do it. So I think the point is, I think something big like one of these events had to happen. It may not be these two events, but I think it had to be something on the level to put her in the state she was in.
Yeah, and I guess I just thought the more we looked into this and the more people we talked to, that I would be more comfortable with a mundane explanation, that I would come to believe this event is not really related to her going to New Hampshire and that her going to New Hampshire wasn't that big a deal. But that just is not it. I feel like the more I learn about this case, the more confused I get about it. It feels like, and I talked about this with Alice, it feels like a tar pit, and the more you struggle in it, the more you get all like covered in tar, like one of those old cartoons. And I just don't know how to sort of extricate ourselves from that. And I'll just always believe that she went up to New Hampshire because of a combination of this event and maybe wrecking her dad's car. I'll just always believe that, and I'm not entirely sure why she did go up to New Hampshire. But I think all this is significant because I think it speaks to her state of mind when that accident happened and why she didn't do what most people do when they get in a wreck, which is just sit in their car and wait for the police to arrive.
So, my theory at the end of episode 4 of the Maura Murray episodes was that I thought she got into a car with someone. I didn't know if that person was the one who ultimately murdered her, and I thought she was murdered. But in order to believe kind of my theory, you have to believe that she would get into a car pitch black at night on this kind of rural road. And since we recorded those episodes, we have found some additional information. We have, we spoke to both Bill and Julie, and we asked them both, is this something that you could imagine Maura doing, getting in the car with a stranger? And both of them, we were surprised, said, yeah, we could totally see her doing something like that. They said that she knew this area and she only had good impressions of people in this area. People were friendly. I think they would stay in like communal lodges for hikers. Those sort of take a break in a bunk. Anyone can kind of stay there. Communal showers sort of thing. And that she was not unfamiliar with the types of people who were in the White Mountains, and she felt perfectly comfortable. This was brand new information to both of us, and I don't think it necessarily means she got into a car, but I had said in the podcast that I myself would be a little bit nervous about getting in the car with a stranger. Let me actually go back to the night she wrecked her dad's car or got into that accident. She got into the car with the tow truck driver who gave her a ride to her dad's hotel. She didn't get into the car with the police officer. For me, I would have probably gotten into the car with a police officer, not a tow truck driver, in the middle of the night. But that is one example of her getting into a car with a stranger. Now, this might be slightly different because a tow truck driver is affiliated with, a towing company, and you might feel safer with someone like that. But it's still the middle of the night, and you don't know this person. They don't necessarily, they're not beholden to you for any reason. So we have actually an example of her getting in the car in the middle of the night with someone she doesn't know.
Yeah, and I was stunned by this. We talked to Bill, and he related an incident where he and Maura were in the White Mountains. They were in, this area of New Hampshire, and they had just finished up a hike. And they came out on the road, and, it was late, and they were tired, and they were going to have to walk back to their car. And Maura suggested, why don't we just hitchhike? And sort of explained that, it's New Hampshire. These people are all great. Nobody's going to do anything. And later on, she suggested they pick up a hitchhiker. So when we talked to Julie about this, I just assumed that Julie would say, no, that's stupid. She would never do that. But Julie thought, yeah, that's exactly something she would do. And we even followed up with would she do it at 7:30 at night in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire? And she thought she would, that she was a trusting person and she was 21 years old and all of the things that would lead you to do that. And I got to say, that changed my perspective on this. I know I said in the episode that she would get in the car to get away, and I thought she would just because I thought she was desperate. But now I'm beginning to think, even if I'm wrong and she wasn't desperate, and she was just eating Twizzlers with Diet Coke, which, by the way, one of my friends wanted me to let everyone know that when he would take finals in law school, he would buy a pack of Twizzlers and a 6-pack of Diet Coke, and he would just drink the Diet Coke with the Twizzlers, and that's all he would eat during finals. So I guess that is something people do. But even
that may be the smoking gun, Brett, to solving this case.
Yeah, exactly. But even if that's all it was, and she just wanted to get a ride down to the next town so she could get cell service, I didn't think that she would hitchhike with somebody for that purpose. But after learning that, I think she probably would. And I got to think, combined with the issues with her disappearing into the woods, I still think that could be possible. I don't buy the whole, well, they would have found her footprints thing, because I think there are ways that it could have happened where they wouldn't have seen that. But I got to think that the chances of her getting into a car are much higher now than what I thought when we first had this conversation.
And it gets exponentially more difficult to find someone when you remove them from the immediate, perimeter of where the accident is. So she could be in another state. And that may be part of the reason it's so difficult to find out more about this case.
Now, we could talk about this forever, but I think we got one more thing that I want to address. And then tomorrow we'll be back and we'll talk some legal stuff. We got some questions about the timeline, because we did the timeline and we kind of moved on. And we did the timeline sort of in the context of police involvement in this crime. And we had some people who didn't like that. We had some people who wanted us to go through the timeline in more detail and sort of address this, is it 7:25 to 7:35, or is it 7:25 to 7:47? What exactly is the timeline? And so I'm going to say the most controversial thing I will ever say on this podcast, and that is the timeline doesn't matter.
Take it back. Save yourself. The Twitterers are coming for you.
Let me give you some caveats on this. Of course, it matters in some way, right? Like knowing exactly how it went down matters to some extent. But think about what you got here. Most police officers would kill to have a timeline where exactly, that something happened between 7:25 and 7:47. That's a great, tight timeline, right? Even if you don't know exactly when things happened in that 22 minutes or whatever. I mean, that's not a lot of time. I mean, like I said, most police officers investigating something would kill for a timeline like that. Now, it makes the story sexier if it's 10 minutes, but disappearing in 22 minutes is still pretty amazing. And I honestly think, 22 minutes, that's a little bit more time for a car to pass, for her to get picked up. It's a little bit more time for her to get away. If she walked away, it makes the disappearance a little less inexplicable, though not that much more inexplicable. And look, if you disagree with me, and I'm sure you do, let me know why you think the timeline matters. Because the only thing I can think of where the timeline would matter is if the police are involved and if witness A's story becomes a critical one. Otherwise, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters if she disappeared at 7:35 or she disappeared at 7:47. And like I said, I really only think it matters if the police are involved. And that brings us to our last topic of the day, Bruce McKay. This was in high demand, the Bruce McKay conspiracy theory. So for those of you who don't know, I'll just lay it out for you. Bruce McKay is a controversial police officer who at the time was working in the area. He did not work for Haverhill PD. I think he worked for Franconia PD. Could be wrong about that. I'm sure someone will correct me if I am. But because of where he was working, he could have been dispatched to Maura's accident. He would have been aware of Maura's accident. He was on duty at the time. So the theory goes that he hears the call at 7:27. About that time, he clears the scene of an accident. I'm actually not sure if it was an accident. It was something. He was at some incident. He clears the scene at 7:27-ish, and then he kind of disappears for 2 hours, and nobody knows where he is. And so the theory is that he drove over to where Maura was, that he shows up, he hits his vehicle that Witness A sees as she drives by. This is a little confusing because if she really did see the 001 SUV, then I don't know how it would be Bruce McKay's. But in any event, that it was his vehicle, and then Cecil Smith shows up later, and by that time, Bruce has sort of spirited Maura away to a local establishment, a seedy dive motel he was known to frequent, murders her there, gets rid of her, and then sort of the police code of silence covers it, and nobody knows except maybe Cecil Smith, and this followed him to his grave or whatever. Like I said, Bruce McKay is very controversial. I'll read you something from Boston Magazine, who did a story on him after he was actually killed on duty. And this will give you an idea of who he was. So, quote, "Once it was said he pulled over a 79-year-old woman for an expired registration sticker. After she tried to explain that she was heading home to cook dinner for her husband, he made her wait in the car for 2 hours. When McKay discovered a group of kids celebrating their high school graduation by frolicking along the river, he had every one of their cars towed. He'd even threatened to ticket a man for driving his riding mower across the road." So, look, he was kind of a jerk, right? and he, was accused of sort of using his power, I guess, in an abusive manner. And eventually, some people say that this led to his death. There was a person named Lico Kinney who was in the community. Lico Kinney had told people that Bruce McKay was harassing him. One day, Bruce McKay tries to pull Lico Kinney over. Lico Kinney doesn't want to pull over. Eventually, Bruce McKay sort of forces him off the side of the road. And then, and this is all on dashboard camera, he gets out of his cruiser, walks up to the car, sprays pepper spray into the car, turns around and walks off. And as he's doing that, Lico Kinney leans out and shoots him and kills him. And so that's how Bruce McKay was murdered. The video's available. This was a famous incident, even unrelated to Maura Murray. I'm not exactly sure when Bruce McKay became the topic of so much conversation in relation to her. Here's the thing I'll say about this. Number one, the fact that he was a jerk does not mean he's a murderer. That's the first thing. The second thing, I don't know why he would go to this car wreck with Maura. I think the assumption is he hears, "Oh, young lady in trouble," and thinks, "I can prey on her." The problem with that is we didn't know it was a woman at the time. My understanding, at least, is the Faith Westman call does not define whether or not it is a woman. And in fact, this is the famous man smoking a cigarette call. Now, some people say that she didn't say it was a man smoking a cigarette, but the log says man smoking a cigarette. So you can expect that when the call was made out to the officers, that was one of the things included. So it's unclear why Bruce would even go to the scene of the accident in the first place. And third, just returning back to what we were saying back in the episode, if he did go, it is unimaginable to me that he would decide, with knowing that a 911 call has come in, assuming that the people who called it in are probably still watching the scene, that he would nevertheless take the chance in a not deserted area to kidnap her, and that he would get away with it. It's just difficult for me to imagine. I get that he was off the radar for 2 hours, but I think it is just a huge leap to go from he was off the radar and in the general area to he drove over there, kidnapped Maura, murdered her, hid her body, and people like Cecil Smith hit that fact years after he died. Bruce McKay was killed not that long after this, like 2006, 2007, something like that. So there's not even a reason to have this sort of conspiracy of silence about Bruce. So I got to say, until we see any evidence that he was there, I just don't think the Bruce McKay theory holds much water. Last thing, somebody asked us what people can do to help find Maura. I think keep talking about the case, keep tweeting about the case, be nice to each other, be nice to people who are new to the community, bring people in, don't fight amongst yourselves.
And in my experience, I really have been so humbled by how generous and gracious people in this Maura Murray community have been to us, pointing us to evidence we may have overlooked and helping us think through some theories and some different analysis. And so we know this community is capable of just incredible things and coming together. So we just encourage and ask you all to extend that grace to others in the community, because this case is special. People are so passionate about it. Not every missing person case or victim of a crime has this type of attention and passion coming out of it. If we could just harness that passion and work together, I really do think we can make strides in this case.
I ridiculed James Renner's theory, and he's the nicest guy. Aaron Larkin has just been incredible. Everybody's been awesome. So I feel like we can all be awesome together and to each other. But yeah, keep talking about it. Keep her name out there. If she was murdered, somebody knows something. That's all there is to it. It's always true. If she was murdered, somebody knows something. And it may just be as simple as crazy as it is to think, they don't know they know something because they've never heard of Maura Murray. And if they do hear about it, they'll put two and two together, and then all of a sudden you have a break in the case. And that's what we hope happens. So I hope you guys will keep talking about it. I hope you'll keep letting us know what you think. You can hit us up, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod, at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and then prosecutorspodcast.com. Is that us? Prosecutorspodcast.com. And we created a little researching Maura Murray because people were sending us stuff. So we've got some, one site that sort of brought a lot of information together. We also just linked to James Renner's site and to the family's site. So let us know what you think. Don't be strangers. Don't be shy. I know you won't be. But we really enjoyed doing this case, and we really loved all the feedback we got from you folks. So, yes, thank you for listening. Thanks for leaving those reviews. I got to tell you, they mean a lot. Love seeing those nice words. 5 stars are great. 4 stars are fine. Anything else we don't want, but that's okay. Keep telling your friends. We really, and I know everybody says this, but we really do appreciate it, and it thrills us. And, when we get nice comments or whatever, we're sending them back and forth to each other on text. So, keep them coming. But we'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk about legal stuff with you. We'll try not to bore you to death. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
I think these rainy days mess with my head.
You think so?
Maybe it's the quarantine that's messing with my head, let's be honest.
I don't know. I'm starting to lose it a little bit.
I've lost it. I've straight up lost it.
It's just like the never-ending quarantine. It's not, we're not even really in quarantine right now, but I feel like we are anyway.
Well, there's nowhere to go.
Away. I need to listen to Patrice Richardson too, because just see if it was completely off the rails.
What do you mean?
I just,
You mean your emotions?
I just feel like I was not going to be overly emotional.
You weren't. Not that one. You were pretty heated in the first one, I'm not gonna lie. Not in a bad way, you just were. I was like, oh, wow, we're bringing the fire.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.